Welcome to a new episode of Future Frame TV, the collective podcast of Traces and Dreams. I am Connie Nshemereirwe and I am the host of A is Not for Apple, a series exploring the extent to which our education systems in Africa reflect our lived experiences as Africans, and how in turn we can transform that education to help us more fruitfully engage with the challenges and inconsistencies we see in our reality. Today, my guest is linguistics professor Binyam from Ethiopia, who currently works with the Africa Institute in the United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Binyam.
Thank you for having me, Connie.
Binyam received his PhD at the young age of 29 at the University of Oslo and has studied some of the least known languages in Ethiopia. But more interestingly to me is his study of the use of mother tongue in education in Africa. Before we dive in, Binyam, I always ask my guests one question at the very beginning, and that is, when you hear the phrase, A is not for Apple, what comes to mind?
Thank you for having me, Connie, and it's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. It's very relevant ones, and thank you and your team for hosting it and for organizing it. The statement that you just mentioned, when I hear it, I think what comes to my mind is probably a call to make our education system relevant and contextualized and useful. If we talk about A is for Apple in the context of Africa, or speaking particularly in Ethiopia, from which I know a bit more about, I think for me, the fact that I can question A is for Apple, why it's not relevant in two ways. One, it assumes that, there is English. Like when children go to school, that's the English when they learn those basic skills, reading skills, literacy skills. English is the first language that they face. And I have a question why we need to do that. And the second thing is, even if, okay, let's say they learn English as one subject or as a language of instruction, but the very fact that you have A for Apple is also an indication that we haven't made our education system relevant, because how many children in the continent know about Apple? Apple, how is it common and regular in our daily lives? So these are the questions that we can ask. So even if we say it's in English, we could have said, for example, A is for Africa, A is for ananas. There are different ways we can question it. So for me, it's all about a question of relevance in education, a question of contextualization in education, which is key to the quality of education.
I could not agree with you more. I always tell my guests that the first time that I saw a physical apple, I was 15, something like that. And I had already had it in my mind that all the same, A is for this fruit apple that I only saw in books or on television. So certainly there are all sorts of other things, if we want to learn the alphabet, the English alphabet, that we could use A is for. And I know that you're a linguistics professor, and I'm aware that you study some less known languages in Ethiopia. Can you tell us a little bit about that research and how you might think this concept of A is not for Apple might fit in your studies around those less known languages and how that translates to the education of children who speak those languages?
That's a great question, Connie. This least known, least used, least developed, or more developed, it's a relative term. It's very relative. This is in the sense that if you compare some of the well-developed languages in Africa, in the continent, as compared to some of the languages like English or French, their role is less. The role that they play in our education, in our everyday, in communication, in media, this and that becomes less. So, and then relatively again, there are other languages in Africa. We have about 2,000 languages in the continent. Of course, some have millions of speakers, others have thousands, some has even few number of speakers. So the thing is that, so this being least known and least developed is relative. But at the core of it, as a linguist, what I always believed and what I always think it's very important is that every language is very relevant. Every language is useful to the community that it serves. It's good enough, it's just that for the everyday communication, for whatever the language is needed, it's relevant enough. And it's language is not also just a communicative tool. We believe that language is beyond communication, and in the sense that it is an archive of knowledge, an archive of culture, and it's also it's also something that we use for identity purposes. So in the sense, we need to understand and use language and understand it in such a way that it's bigger than a mere instrument of communication. So if you see it in that way, when you study communication, when you study a society, when you try to understand or develop and empower a society, it's very important that we use that which is close to their heart and close to their community. And when you bring something like education, which is, for me, I see it as a tool for empowerment, it's really important that we use something which is used by the society, which is relevant to the society, which is relevant to their culture and to their cultural identity. So I see it in such a way that that the degree may vary, but at least those languages which are used in Africa, as compared to other languages, they have their own relative impositions or challenges. And when it become even less and less, the challenges become too many and too complex.
Yeah, when I read the book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I think, Decolonizing the Mind, I really began to understand for myself the importance of language, of mother tongue, even in a child's life or in a person's life. In naming the things around them, in naming the experiences that we share. And for instance, my mother often uses words for phenomena that we cannot find a word in English. And because I do not know the word in my mother tongue for that phenomenon basically does not exist for me. I cannot share in that experience with my mother because I cannot name it. Similarly, there are a lot of things that we name in English that are foreign to us, I guess. It's another culture that experienced a phenomenon and then named that phenomenon, and then that language has now come to me. So in a way, English brings with it this culture, this identity, which might separate me from those that are not educated in my own environment. And for me, when I think about the value of education, of educating a child, it's part of what you hope the child will be able to do when they grow up is to understand the phenomena around them, whether they are physical phenomena, whether they are social phenomena. And so the question arises, if a child's education progresses in a language that carries phenomena, experience, culture that is not immediately around them, then how well is that child going to be able to recognize the phenomena around them, since they cannot name them or engage with them? I don't know if you relate to what I'm saying.
Absolutely, Connie. I mean, that's why, I mean, for me, education is all about empowerment, empowering people, empowering children. And if you want to empower them, how is it possible that it's sort of the paradigm that we're using now, by using other languages which are not closely related to the children, is that we are sort of introducing another paradigm when they already have a paradigm, a language that they speak at home, a language that they associate with, the language that they play with, the language that they use with their with the children around them. It's very important that we respect that knowledge. It has to be a continuation. You know, when you say you want to empower children through education, it's very important that that empowerment takes due recognition to the knowledge that they know. I mean, they know a lot of things. It's not like they come to school and to start everything from scratch. They know a lot of things from they have learned a lot of things from their family. They have learned a lot of things from their peers. They play. They have a lot of understanding. So when they come to school, it's very crucial that that continuation is kept. And one way to continue that continuation is to use the same language that they use at home, that they use in the community. So the issue of mother tongue in education is a question of making that important connection between home and school, that home and school. And then the second point is, once they come to school, imagine like they go to school, and then when we want them to learn things, we want them to develop their curiosity, and then we are confusing them by using another language, a language that they don't know, a language that they don't understand well. So you see what sort of confusion that we will create. So this has a direct implication on the quality of education. We need to communicate with them. They need to communicate with the teacher and the students. So that way, even that communication is not happening. And you see that it has a direct implication on the quality of education, on the quality of empowerment. In fact, we say, curiosity is key to learning. And by just by not using a language that they know, we're going to replace that curiosity by fear, by embarrassment, by confusion. So for this sort of issues, both, as I mentioned earlier, important connection between home, community, and school, but also what happens in school. We wanted to build a foundation for them to grow, to be empowered. And for that, communication needs to happen. And it has to be, communication happens in a language that they know. And that communication with the teacher, that communication with the school, that communication with their peers. So as a tool as well, we are hindering them rather than supporting them and encouraging them. So it has a lot of implications to the quality of education that we wanted to bring.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you when you speak about the confusion and the way in which education might remove people from their own environment. If they're going to learn about things that they are unable to see in their own environment, then at some moment, education becomes divorced from reality for them. So education now becomes something that is separate. It's not something that flows into their daily lives or flows into their communities. And therefore, it turns out that an educated person might then always be unable to transfer that education to what goes on around them, because everything they learned was something abstract or foreign or just removed from their daily experience.
It creates that disconnection. You're right. It was supposed to connect and to grow, not to disconnect.
Yeah.
That
okay,
is
so
failing us.
Yeah, so I think that also you were speaking about the quality of education, but for me, it also touches on the question of the relevance of education.
Yeah.
Therefore, how that education can help a child respond to the challenges around them and think about life and think about how that life can be improved.
Yeah, I can't agree more.
And as we have this discussion, the other thing that comes to mind, of course, is in my own country, at least, reflecting on the resistance that the community has on having education in mother tongue. In Uganda, people think that education in mother tongue is actually an education of lower quality. They think that it's an education that does not allow a child to live in the modern society, and it's just thought of as a second-rate education. I wonder how it is in Ethiopia, or if you have anything to share about these moves to make mother tongue education more commonplace across Africa. Maybe you have something that you can share with us.
That's a good point, and I understand that's a concern that a lot of people sort of share. There are two things here. One, when we just say we need to use mother tongue education in school, before we do that and before we use them in education, there is something that has to be done before it. These languages has to be ready. They have to be ready to be used in a school. We have to invest in them. We have to develop them. Some of them are not written, for example. They have to be written. Some of them do not have basic materials, resources. We need to work on those. We need to prepare textbooks, for example. We need to have dictionaries. We need to have reading materials. We need to have, teachers trained to teach in those languages. So just to remind people that when we say, or when we promote the use of mother language in education, it's with the understanding that before that happens, there is so much work now that needs to be done in terms of developing and preparing those languages for those roles. So if you don't do that and rush into the education system, to involve them into education system, obviously it leads, or it proves the people's concerns right in such a way that, these languages are not prepared, we're just introducing them. And with all that, then it will have influences it will have impacts on the way that language is used in education as a mother tongue. So these things have to be separated, one. So when we say we promote mother tongue education, it's with the intention that work has to be done to develop and to prepare these languages, to prepare teachers. So that's an important issue. The second point is, especially at a foundational level, at a pre-primary and primary levels, what happens is that, these are foundational skills, especially education. If you see reading and writing, these are the key skills that we want to teach in those levels. The foundational skills are transferable. Once you learn them in a particular language, those skills can be transferred easily when you learn other languages. This is the second point that I wanted to highlight. So, and then to learn those skills, it's easier that you learn them in a language that you know. For example, reading is basically, of course, there are a lot of other things. Reading and literacy is basically about identifying sounds. You need to identify sounds. You know, when I speak now, but when I speak, they are made of blocks of sounds. In linguistics, we call them phonemes. So people, the students or kids need to understand that there are those blocks, and those blocks can be represented by letters and that association between those letters. So there are these sorts of technical things that happen when we say we teach reading or we teach literacy. So once the children learn those basic skills, they can easily transfer them to other languages when they learn English or any other language. The third important point, which is connected to this one, is we're not saying children shouldn't learn other languages. We want them to learn other languages. And then there has to be, the education system needs to have a plan. You know, they start early at a foundational level. The best language to use is the mother tongue or the language that they know best, and then gradually give them the opportunity to learn other languages as well. We're not just saying, you know, they keep that language and it's not widely spoken enough and this and that. Once they are introduced into the basic skills, they, you know, build that foundations, and then they can easily find a way to develop other languages. And the education system must be planned in such a way that it gives them the opportunity, you know, to keep their identity, to keep those skills, to keep their sort of dignity and their language, at the same time build on that and learn other important languages. So these are the things that I can say.
Yeah, and I really do agree. It's I think one of the things that maybe the public has to appreciate is that when you learn how to read and write in the language that you speak at home, these are skills you can transfer to reading other languages or speaking other languages. And in Uganda in particular, we've been having these skills assessments over the last 10, 15 years. And the level of reading and literacy is really low and is even declining. And I'm afraid that people think, oh, we should just increase the teaching of English or increase the books in English, whereas probably it's not an easy solution, but it is a solution that you pay attention also to developing materials and the local languages that people speak. When you say that we need that the work that has to be done before implementing mother tongue education is this further development of our local languages, and you say we have 2,000 plus, it's a very big job to be done. I wonder if we even have the experts to do it. We probably do. But I think it's something that governments are probably not all that invested in. They are not convinced that it is something that is worth doing, because after all, English, French, these international languages are, even Chinese, I'm being told in some parts of Africa, are some of the languages that are being prioritized because they are seen as more useful. And yet, as you say, one already knows one's mother tongue. It's the way that they have grown up, it's the way they've experienced the world before they come to school. But two, it's a language that they will continue to speak, that will continue to keep them connected to their community and to their environment. But three, it's also, in learning it at the foundation level, it's a foundation for them to learn all these other languages that we wish them to learn. So it's something that would require some maybe public education. I don't know how you might see how we might convince the public or convince policymakers or to do this difficult and perhaps long-term thing that they need to do to get ready to have this mother tongue education. What do you think?
Yeah, Connie, 2 points. One, with regard to the number of languages. that you mentioned. I know looking at it from outside, it sort of discourages us from, how can we develop all this number of languages and use them in a school, But the question is, we need to understand the importance of this. Once we understand that we're not empowering children as much as we should, in some cases, it's even failing us, the strategies that we're using, then it's important to stop and to think, what are the new ways, what are the things that we want to improve? And one of the key things that we need to improve is the use of mother language in our schools. So it's important that whatever we're doing is not successful. As you mentioned rightly, there are several studies across the continent that shows the reading skills of children isn't improving. They stay in school for 4, 5, 6 years, but they still cannot read and write. That's sort of the situation we're in. So it's very important that whatever we're doing is not working. So that's why it's important to take time and to think about this. Second, with regard to the numbers, it's also very important to think that we can start gradually. It doesn't have to be, all these languages at once. There are different ways we can think. For example, one statistic, we have to prioritize in terms of action implementation. For example, one number that I can give is about 70% of the whole African population. I think we speak about 10 languages. About 10 languages somehow cover 70, 80% of the population. So we don't have to wait until we reach 100% of our population. We have these languages which are spoken by millions and millions of people that we can start with. And that way, it gives us the opportunity to give access, quality access education to this percentage of population, which is huge. At the same time, it gives us also the opportunity to experiment and to learn and to gradually expand and reach out to the other languages. So I'm just saying that it's not also as scary as it looks, the numbers. When you dig deeper, you understand that, it's about 10 languages which are commonly spoken by the majority of the population. And with due importance to all the other languages, we can prioritize and we can start. So this is something we can do. And a final point, I even hear this sort of complaints from parents. Parents, okay, let's see, policymakers, it's one thing, but even parents, this is the language that they speak at home. And then you see them promoting other languages. And you can be certain that parents have the best interests for their children. They have that best intentions. But still, they may promote the use of other languages in school. So there is a big gap in terms of changing attitudes, convincing and explaining to parents and to policymakers and to teachers and to all education stakeholders that it is about the facts. The research shows it. The facts. It's a fact that it's very important we use those languages, and we need to convince them, and we need to change those attitudes. Otherwise, it can be a problem.
Right. It's very interesting to hear that actually just did you say about 10 languages represent 70% and more of the languages that we speak in Africa, or the languages that we understand? And I wonder if you are aware of any initiatives around Africa where you can say that some languages are already quite well developed, and in fact, we can already start from there. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, Connie. There are several initiatives and efforts that are being done across the continent. I think South Africa, for example, have an excellent constitution that recognizes all, I think about 11 languages equally, and they try to use them in education, in science, in media. I'm sure it has its own challenges when it comes to implementation, but you appreciate the level of recognition that has been given at the level of the constitution and the efforts that are being exerted. Another probably good example with all the challenges is the Ethiopian experience. Since almost the last 2 decades and a half, we have been promoting the use of mother tongue in education, and that I think was an extremely important development in the sense that currently about 52 languages, we have about 90 languages overall, and currently about 52 languages are used in school in one way or another, some as a medium of education, some as taught as a subject. And I think this is an important development. This is an important effort. It has its own complexities, and we can talk about it in more details probably some other time. But the effort, to begin with, to recognize how important language is in education and to try to include them into the education system in different ways, and to include them. Of course, it happened gradually, but currently about 50 of them into the education system was extremely daring and extremely useful. Of course, that doesn't, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of work has to be done behind it before the languages were used in education, and there was some rush to introduce as many languages as possible into education system. And there was more about political recognition than education per se. So there are a lot of complexities around it, and then we can talk more in more details about it later. But that effort has been done, and it has had some successes, but also a lot of challenges. But as everything, that's how it goes. You start something, you learn from it, and you develop it, and then you move further. So I think the Ethiopian experience is a good example. I don't think there is anywhere in the continent that it has been tried with such an extent. And I think there is so much we can learn from it, with both from what has worked and what hasn't worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned it earlier that just getting a start is already an opportunity for us to experiment, to learn from the process. And if you're saying Ethiopia and South Africa have already done something, and especially the political support appears to be very, very important, because many of us, of course, even have a mental block or a mental attitude towards our local languages, that we put them at a lower level than other languages, or Western languages, or maybe think of them as less useful or less important. And moving on a little bit then to look forward to the future, we both know how rapidly Africa's population is growing, and the fact that I think in another 20, 30 years, our population is expected to double. So a lot of children are going to be born, and our education systems are going to be needing to raise those children. And so in the case of mother tongue education, when you speak of all the work that still has to be done to develop the languages, I wonder what's a practical first step that we can take, really. So maybe when thinking about listening to you, I'm thinking there's a lot to learn from South Africa and Ethiopia, for one. And then the second thing that I think is the fact that our political leaders really need a lot of convincing about the importance of these languages and the benefit to even raising the literacy levels of the population. So there are definitely a lot of benefits, and those are some of the people we can address first. But in your mind, what would be some practical, small things that we could already begin to do to prepare for all these millions of children that are soon to be added to the population, to make sure that they can benefit from the promise of what mother tongue education brings?
That's really, a challenge in its own right, but also an opportunity as a continent. The fact that we have a population that's growing, a young population, but it's also a huge responsibility. So 2 points. One, I think it's time that we start, acknowledging the fact that the education system that we're using today isn't working as much as we wish it. In some cases, it's even failing us. So to have that acceptance, to have to take that responsibility. So it's not taking us, it's not empowering our youth. It's not a quality education. So to really have the understanding that something needs to be done about it. I think that's one thing that, and the change of attitude overall by policymakers, educators, parents, and the community at large. And I think that some work needs to be done to change those attitudes and to face the reality, to take what is happening for what it is, so that the extent of the education, the quality is deteriorating, and we need something to do about it. So this understanding is very important. Of course, all of us, including what you're doing now, and all the scholars and activists and everyone, educators, we need to do something to convince and to change attitudes. That's one important thing. And the second thing is that we don't have to, when we say we need to recognize mother tongue, we don't have to do everything at once. As I mentioned earlier, things can start gradually, and we can be very creative about it. We can be very innovative and creative about it. For example, I know in some places, in Ethiopia, where the policy allows, in some regions, the policy allows, like at a grade 5 or 6, you shift into English. You use mother tongue, and at a grade 6, the medium of education shifts into English. I understand that they have the best intentions, to empower these children and to make them ready for the globalized and for the world. But the situation is that the teachers doesn't know English as much, and the students doesn't know it, and they're not even familiar to it. It's foreign to them, to their daily lives. And can you imagine what sort of situation that's created? So the policy says you teach in English, and from what we hear, teachers teach in local languages because they don't know it, and they, that sort of confusion. So just saying that sometimes it doesn't have to be at a policy level, even at school level, there are things that we can do. We can allow and we can encourage teachers to explain to students in a language that they understand best. They can be flexible to use this or that, because at the end of the day, the most important thing is that for the children to learn and to be empowered. So I'm just saying that in addition to the things that happen at a policy, at a government level, there are things that we can do even at school level. And those little things can make a big change. But I want to also take a responsibility that you people like you and me have a lot of responsibility to help and to change attitudes about the power of mother tongue, the importance of mother tongue, and the power of mother tongue in education.
Yes, I really like that you say that it's not only a responsibility, it's also an opportunity for us to ensure that these next generations of children can benefit from what mother tongue education can bring to them in terms of how well their literacy and numeracy can develop, how well they can understand the actual environment that they live in. And for me, mother tongue education also promises a better connection to our communities, to our culture, to our identity, as you said at the beginning. And also, you know, in these African countries of ours, the educated become the elite and quite removed from the other people who probably know a lot more than we educated people know. They know the names of plants, they know the uses of plants, they know, they have a lot of knowledge, but because they don't speak English or are not educated, we, the educated, are not able to harness that community knowledge or the possibility to address our challenges together in a language that we all understand. But in any case, I find that many of the people who drop out of school without learning how to read or write, a big obstacle is this language barrier where they do not know the English, as you said, even the teachers do not know the English. And then they spend 3, 4, 5 years in this environment where everything they know is put aside and they must try and grapple with this foreign language and the foreign concepts therein. And then they drop out anyway, and they've learned nothing. They haven't learned how to read, they haven't learned how to write, they haven't learned the English. It's so many years wasted. And then they are called uneducated and kept out of development processes. I think it's a loss. I think you mentioned it as well, that we lose a lot in insisting on this way of educating that many of us realize and feel actually doesn't serve us as well as we think it should. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Binyam, and sharing your insights on the importance of language, of mother tongue language in education, and some of the things that we can do at policy level, at community level, in our minds, but also letting us understand that teaching in mother tongue has a lot of benefits, even in helping us achieve the goals of education that we are trying to achieve and that we are so far not achieving that well. I wonder if you have any last words to share with us before we close.
You said it so nicely, Connie, and you summarized it very well. And, you know, just to say that we have a lot of work to be done. And, you know, there are different ways of doing things in different countries, in different communities. It's just that we need to accept the fact that, you know, we need to understand it's important and try to do something about it in different ways. So there is no one way of doing it. It's just that once we acknowledge the importance, we can be very creative and innovative about it. I know there is the wisdom there. It's just that once we understand it, I know the wisdom is there in each community, in each school, in each country. It's just that we need to allow that creativity, that innovation, that, you know, openness to flourish. And that way, something can be done at a teacher level, at a school level, at a community level, at the policy level, and at the levels of scholars and so on and so forth. So thank you very much for inviting me. I think this is an important conversation that you are hosting, and thank you very much for the invitation again.
Thanks, Binyam. Let the conversation continue, and we'll soon be speaking.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you very much.